Our dinosaur of the day is Changyuraptor yangi, which means long-feathered robber. It's 125 million years old, and it could probably fly, but it was not a bird. Actually, what makes it really interesting is it is a non-avian dinosaur. It lived in the Cretaceous period in China. It was found in northeastern China in the Liaoning Province, and Gang Han, a paleontologist from Bohai University, and his team, which included researchers from China, the US, and South Africa, described Changyuraptor in Nature Communications in July 2014. One of Changyuraptor's close relatives is Microraptor, and Microraptor had hind wings on its legs, which were basically elaborate tail feathers. But Changyuraptor was a lot bigger than Microraptor. Microraptor was about the size of a hawk, while Changyuraptor was closer to the size of an eagle. It was 4.3 feet long with tail feathers that were almost 1 foot long, and these are the longest feathers found on a non-avian dinosaur. And Changyuraptor had a 21-foot wingspan. But again, it was not a bird. The first birds actually descended from dinosaurs 25 million years earlier, and Changyuraptor, like Microraptor, was part of this group called dromaeosaurids. And we've talked about a dromaeosaurid before, Dinosaur, which lived about 70 million years ago in the Gobi Desert. And for a long time, all scientists knew about it was that it had giant arms. Changyuraptor was also not a pterosaur, which is another important distinction. Pterosaurs were a separate group that were known for their flying capabilities.
So when I heard Changyuraptor had a 21-foot wingspan, I was thinking, that is really huge. Compared to the Quetzalcoatlus, which was the largest flying creature that we've discovered so far in the dinosaur era, it wasn't that big because that pterosaur had a wingspan that almost reached 40 feet, which is just enormous. But compared to any modern flying bird, it would just be astonishingly big. So the biggest current wingspan of a bird is the wandering albatross, which flies really long distances over the ocean. So it has to be able to pick up on updrafts from the ocean, which means it needs a really big wingspan. It only has about a 10-foot wingspan on average. So this is more than twice as big as that, which is just pretty crazy. And that foot-long feather, too, to go with it is pretty nuts.
Changyuraptor is a dromaeosaurid, but it's also part of the Microraptoria group, which is a group of predatory dinosaurs with 4 wings, and this means that they had such long feathers on their legs it looked like they had a second set of wings. The discovery of Changyuraptor may help to show how flight evolved, though there was probably evolutionary convergence since there were birds 25 million years before Changyuraptor. And Michael Habib, a flight expert and co-author of the study, who's from the University of Southern California, said that Changyuraptor's long feathers and 4 wings may have been, quote, quite common amongst paravians, which is a group that includes birds and close non-avian relatives with feathers. So even though scientists think that Changyuraptor may have been able to fly, it's not clear how the animal moved through the air.
We've briefly mentioned in another podcast, but there are quite a few things that are required for the bird lifestyle that dinosaurs were already doing long before they could fly. So, for instance, the hollow bones that larger dinosaurs had to keep their weight down eventually became useful for birds to keep their weight down for flying. And the nesting behavior, which birds use to keep their young up in trees and nests away from predators, was also exhibited by dinosaurs down on the ground. And then finally with dinosaurs like the Changyuraptor, the feathers obviously come in very handy when you're trying to fly, although they certainly weren't originally evolved with the intention of flight. Because animals don't evolve with a game plan of where they're going to be millions of years in the future. In other words, even though avian dinosaurs and their descendants, modern birds, use feathers for flight, the first feathers that appeared on dinosaurs couldn't have been used for flight because they wouldn't have been large enough or on wing structures, but they would have gone through a phase where they were either gliding or hopping or something that had an evolutionary advantage and then slowly evolved into full flight. So we're not sure exactly where Changyuraptor was on the spectrum, but since it had so many feathers and they were so large and similar to modern birds, it's likely that it was more on the full flight end of the spectrum.
Microraptorines, the group that Changyuraptor was a part of, are closely related to birds, and scientists think they probably had a common raptor ancestor. Going back to how Changyuraptor may have flown, some paleontologists thought it may have flown with a spread eagle or biplane posture, but that theory doesn't really fit with Changyuraptor's anatomy, because it probably wasn't very flexible in the hips like other theropods. Theropods is the broader group that it is a part of. Changyuraptor probably had its legs directly under its body while in the air. However, Changyuraptor may have climbed trees. They probably landed on the ground but spent a lot of time in trees. They could have used their limbs to fly through dense trees, and they could turn and break fast and maybe quickly catch small prey. Again, Changyuraptor is one of the biggest microraptorines, and before Changyuraptor, one of the longest microraptorine tail feathers was only 7 inches long, compared to the 1 foot long feathers found on Changyuraptor. It's also the biggest theropod with feathers on its hind wings, which are the lower hind limbs, and the specimen found was of an adult, not a juvenile.
Changyuraptor had feathers that covered its whole body, and its tail feathers may have helped it land safely because having the tail feathers really aids in the fine control of flight. When landing, you can use the tail feathers to slow the progression to the ground, and that would have helped Changyuraptor prevent from getting injured when landing.
Again, Changyuraptor had 4 wings, or at least what looked like 4 wings, and it's not clear if these 4 wings was something only microraptorines had or something that a common ancestor had. Because it was so large, it probably couldn't fly for long periods of time, and it may have glided from branch to branch of trees. The feathers found on its arm are not that well preserved, so researchers don't know exactly how it supported its weight in the air. Changyuraptor's 1 foot long tail feathers make up about 30% the length of its skeleton, and its feathers may have been used for display. They could have been brightly colored. So even though Changyuraptor probably could fly, according to Oxford University paleobiologist Roger Close, Changyuraptor's discovery doesn't offer any big new insights on how flight evolved, since it had basically the same anatomy of other known 4-winged theropods like Microraptor. Changyuraptor weighed about 9 pounds and was 60% larger than the last Microraptorine found. And when it lived, its habitat was a broad peninsula with volcanoes, a moist forest with lots of conifer and ginkgos, and it had dry summers and cold winters. There were a lot of different carnivores and herbivores that lived there, and there were also a lot of birds, insects, primitive mammals, some flowering plants, as well as lakes full of fish, frogs, and salamanders, so pretty diverse. It's unclear exactly what Changyuraptor ate, but fish and bird bones have been found in its guts, so it may have eaten small prey, including birds, lizards, salamanders, fish, and small mammals. So to get in more about the group that Changyuraptor belongs, again, it's part of Microraptoria. That name means small one who seizes, and as you may guess from the name, most of the dinosaurs in Microraptoria are small, possibly the exception of just Changyuraptor. They're a clade of dromaeosaurid theropods. They're the most primitive ones, and they lived 125 million years ago in China and probably glided through trees. Again, they were usually small. Adults were between 2.5 and 3 feet long and weighing up to a little over 2 pounds. And the first Microraptor was discovered in 2003. It was the one that weighed 2.2 pounds and had large limbs covered in feathers and tail feathers. Early birds, such as Archaeopteryx, also have long feathers on their hind limbs, like Microraptorines, but today's birds usually have bald legs and fly with just 2 wings instead of 4. Changyuraptor did look very bird-like, and interestingly, older dromaeosaurids seemed more bird-like than later ones. So Changyuraptor was 125 million years old and looked pretty bird-like, but then Velociraptor was 75 million years old and seemed much less bird-like.